For the sake of protecting my buddy's privacy, let's call him Mike. Today marks the anniversary of the death of my best friend, Mike. Last summer, Mike and his girlfriend, Sarah, were job hunting. I suggested they apply at my workplace, thinking it'd be nice to have some familiar faces around. They both applied, got hired, and I ended up training them. That's when I got to know Sarah for the first time. After work, the three of us would often hit the gym together. Over time, I got to know Sarah better, and at first, she seemed like a pretty solid person. But then, I noticed she started calling out of work more often. I didn't say anything because, honestly, it wasn't really my business. Around the same time, something seemed off with Mike too. The gym was like his sacred space, a place to blow off steam and reset his mind, so it was weird when he started skipping out on workouts. One day at work, I asked him if everything was okay, but he wasn't ready to talk. After a few more days of this, I asked another friend of ours, Dan, if he'd noticed anything strange or if Mike had confided in him. Dan hadn't heard anything either, but we both agreed something felt off. We kept inviting Mike to the gym, but he kept brushing us off. Then, for his birthday, he invited a bunch of us over to hang out. Mike had just turned 20, and since I was 21, I brought him some beer to celebrate. We spent the night playing Smash Brothers and goofing around with friends. But Sarah's behavior stood out. She seemed distant and detached, which was odd for her, especially at a party like that. The next day, Mike called me, and I could tell right away that he was upset. His voice was shaky as he told me Sarah had confided something to him. She claimed she'd been raped. The news hit me like a freight train, and I started asking questions. Me. What? When did this happen? Where was she? Does she know who did it? Did she go to the cops? Mike. She said it happened yesterday. She was at some guy's house, and he came out of the bathroom wearing a condom, and then undressed her. She didn't go to the police. Me. Wait, what? She didn't fight back or anything? Why was she even there? Dude, this doesn't sound right. Mike. She told me she froze and didn't know what to do. The guy works at the gym. Apparently, he told her he could help her get a job and wanted to prep her for the interview. Me. Hold on, this guy works at the gym? Did she tell you his name? Mike. No, she didn't say. Look, I'll tell you more later. I'm at her house right now. Now, here's the thing, Sarah was no pushover. She was tough, like, could flatten you in a second tough. It didn't add up. I shared everything with Dan, and we both felt there was something fishy about her story. We decided to take Mike out for some food to get him talking. He was clearly hurting. His knuckles were bruised and bloody from punching a tree out of frustration. As we talked, we tread carefully, trying not to upset him more. But the more we pieced together Sarah's version of events, the less it made sense. Dan and I even suggested, gently, that maybe she wasn't telling the truth and could be covering up something she regretted. Mike, understandably, didn't want to believe it at the time. But the very next day, he called us with an update. Sarah had broken up with him. And then she admitted that she hadn't been raped at all, she'd cheated on him. This was the kind of nightmare you wouldn't wish on anyone. Mike had never been with another girl in his life. He and his girlfriend, Sarah, had been together for 5 years, starting back in high school. The whole thing completely blindsided him. Dan and I tried everything we could to keep his mind off what happened. We told him to cut all contact with Sarah and stick with us instead. We figured focusing on healing and stepping away from a liar and a cheater was the best thing for him. But Mike didn't listen. He kept talking to her and then dropped the bombshell that they were getting back together. They even went to couples counseling, once. After that single session, they decided to, mutually, call it quits for good. Mike said he was at peace with it, claimed he was okay. And I believed him. That was my first mistake. I suggested he see a counselor anyway to help him work through everything. He agreed, but like before, he didn't follow through. Every time we talked, something felt off. He seemed distant, almost like his mind was somewhere else. He wiped his Instagram clean except for one lonely picture of a stream and a tree. Whenever we talked, he was holding back tears. It was like pulling teeth to find out what he'd been up to or where he'd been. Still, I reminded him every chance I got that I was there if he needed me. One day, he called and asked if we could meet up. I found him sitting by the lake, where he said he'd been spending a lot of time. When I got there, Dan was already with him. Mike was in pieces, crying, shouting, and just drowning in his frustration and pain. That's when he admitted something that shook me. He hadn't stopped talking to Sarah. He also said he couldn't shake the feeling that her cheating was somehow his fault. Mike, I keep thinking back to when I first started going to the gym. Sarah was so self-conscious about her body back then, so I brought her with me. I taught her everything, my routines, my workouts. She started gaining confidence, and man, she was so happy. I was proud of her, you know. But now I can't stop blaming myself. If I hadn't introduced her to the gym, she never would have met that guy. This is all my fault. Why wouldn't this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? Why would God let this happen to me? If he's even real, why? We tried to comfort him the best we could. I felt terrible for him because I'd been through something similar a few years back. I knew the kind of pain he was feeling, even if it wasn't exactly the same. We took him out for some food, then hung out at his place until we felt like he'd calmed down enough for us to leave. Fast forward 2 days, to the night before the spring semester started. Dan and I were playing Rainbow Six Siege online, just like we usually did, and out of the blue, Mike joined our Discord server. It was the first time we'd heard from him there all summer, and we were so happy to see him pop in. We spent the night chatting about the upcoming semester, goofing off in Siege, and even making plans to take a vacation together during the first break. Honestly, everything felt normal for the first time in months. At the end of the night, we said our goodnights and logged off. Later, I got a string of texts from Mike. He told me I was a great friend and thanked me for being there for him. I shot back something similar, telling him he meant a lot to me too. The next day started off like any other, at least for me. I was sitting through my third class, half listening to the lecture, when my phone started buzzing. I glanced down to see Sarah's name on the screen. Just seeing it annoyed me. I ignored the call, but she didn't let up. Call after call came through until I finally gave in, more out of frustration than anything else. I stepped into the hallway and answered, keeping my voice sharp. "What do you want?" I asked, not bothering to hide my irritation. "Have you seen or heard from Mike today?" she asked, her voice shaky. "No," I said. "Why?" He sent me a really weird text. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. How weird. Like a goodbye text. Her voice cracked, and I could hear sniffling on the other end. "Did you call the police?" I asked, now feeling a knot of worry forming in my chest. "Yeah," she said, "but they don't know where he is. He didn't show up to class, and he's not at home." "All right," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'll try calling him. I'll let you know if I hear anything." I hung up and immediately dialed Mike. No answer. I shot him a text something like, "Dude, you've got to answer. You're freaking everyone out." Still nothing. I called him over and over, at least 20 times, but he never picked up. I couldn't just sit there. I went back into class, grabbed my stuff, and left. My next call was to Dan, and I told him everything Sarah had said. We met up to figure out what to do, but it felt like we were just spinning our wheels. That's when the police called me. They were looking for any information I could give them about Mike. I told them what little I knew, which only made me feel more helpless. After hanging up, Dan and I decided to hit the gym. It wasn't like we could do much else, and we needed a distraction from the growing sense of dread. While we were there, Sarah called again. This time, her voice was even shakier. She told me the police had found Mike's car near the woods. My heart sank. Dan and I left the gym immediately and drove to the spot where they'd found the car. By the time we got there, the sun had set, and it was pitch dark. We asked the officers on the scene if they'd found anything, but they just shook their heads. I dropped Dan off at home afterward, telling him to call me if he heard anything. I promised to do the same. But when I got back to my apartment, it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I sat down with my roommates, trying to make sense of everything, but there were no answers. Mike's last text to me, "You're a great friend," kept replaying in my mind. I couldn't escape the thought that it had been his goodbye. By 11 p.m., I couldn't take the waiting anymore. I called Sarah again. The moment the line connected, I could hear wailing in the background. My hands started to shake. I didn't need to hear anything else to know what it meant. Her sister answered the phone, sobbing, and told me Sarah was too hysterical to talk. I stayed calm somehow, asking for their address. Once I had it, I grabbed my keys and drove straight there. When I arrived, Sarah was a mess. Despite everything she'd done, I did my best to comfort her. I knew Mike would have wanted that. He cared about her more than anything, even after all the pain she'd caused him. I told her the same thing I'd always told him. I was there if she needed me. We kept in touch for a little while after that, but eventually, we stopped talking. And that's the story of Mike's final months. He was planning to ask everyone for advice, whether they thought Sarah had been raped or if she had cheated. I don't know if he ever got around to it. But here's what I do know: don't cheat. If you're unhappy, just end the relationship. And please, don't think suicide is the answer. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and the pain it leaves behind is unbearable. If you're going through something, reach out. If someone has cheated on you or you're struggling, talk to someone. I'm here. I'll listen. Because no one should have to face this kind of pain alone. First off, I just want to say thank you for all the kind words and support. You guys are seriously amazing, and it means the world to me to have people like you to lean on. Now I realized I skipped over an important part of the story, the whole situation with the rape accusation. For a while, there was a lot of confusion about it. It wasn't until later that Sarah finally came clean to Mike, right before they tried going to couples counseling. She admitted that she hadn't been raped at all. She told him she'd lied because she was scared and didn't know how else to handle the mess she'd created. The truth was, she'd voluntarily gone over to the guy's place, fully aware of what was going to happen. They'd been texting for about a week beforehand, and it was all very clear in their conversations. She knew exactly what she was walking into. The guy knew she had a boyfriend, Mike, of course. And get this, he had a girlfriend too. He lied and told Sarah he was single to get her over there. Later on, I found out that his girlfriend was in a long-distance relationship with him. He'd recently gotten out of the army, started college, and decided to cheat on her like it was no big deal. It's just one of those things that makes you shake your head. The amount of hurt and betrayal that spiraled out of this one selfish decision was unreal.